Okay. All right. I'm not really sure how to start this, but I guess we can just start. Um, so we wanted to have this fireside chat with Jordan and Tanner, members of the nervous ecosystem. Jordan on the foundation side, Tanner on the community side. And so recently, we just kind of released the SUDT, I guess, rollout. The first UDTs have been created, the simple user defined tokens, or ERC20s tokens, as people are probably familiar with. And yeah, so we just want to have a chat about Nervos, about SUDT, and anything else that comes up. So with that, it'd be great for you guys to introduce yourselves and how you got fascinated with blockchain, what interests you, and how Nervos fits into all that. So I guess we'll start with Tanner.
Yeah, so I got interested in blockchain when experimenting with cloud storage and how there may be alternatives to the centralized models of cloud storage. And so I built with a couple other developers kind of what would be a toy project of a peer-to-peer cloud storage system. And we didn't plan to use blockchain, actually. But what happened is, as we got more and more into it, realized that it's very hard to engineer confidence in unknown peers and models to inject trust into these environments that we explored besides blockchain and prior to coming upon blockchain were basically various types of reputation-based systems. But in such an anonymous network, reputation only goes so far when you can spin up a new node on your machine, and detecting that type of identity across processes and nodes requires very sophisticated sort of identity inference and fingerprinting, which we didn't do. So beyond that, there was after exploring that, we discovered that perhaps incentive schemes can work. And so the file storage system that we built ended up using proofs of retrievability and random audits. So the files were encrypted and split up into shards and distributed across the network. And anyone hosting files would be audited at random by other nodes in the network. And it's basically this, it's a type of cryptographic challenge, and the solution, the right answer, so to speak, to the challenge was also a key to unlock funds. And so those who were successfully storing files over time had access to funds whenever the random audits occurred at random, yet also periodic enough to ensure that files were kept at the right level of availability via replication, and that it was worth the storage node's time to continuously store and maximize availability. So it was a pretty cool experience because of the fact that it was not as if we knew about blockchain at the beginning and looked for a place to apply it. Rather, after exhausting other solutions, it turns out that blockchain solved a problem that we weren't really seeing a way to solve otherwise.
I see. And what interests you now, kind of looking at blockchain?
Now I'm becoming much more involved in various ways, very new ways to use blockchain as kind of a foundational tool to develop new types of, I would say, community interactions. And I think that what I mean by this is that since the kind of explosion of blockchain interest, there's been a lot of research and continues to be a lot of research on ways to basically coordinate and incentivize various actors. And I also think that there's a growing trend to acknowledge that even the strictest and most rigorous formal verification of systems at the code level is not sufficient to provide confidence and safety, guarantees of confidence and safety, because blockchains are complex, dynamic systems with emergent properties that you cannot observe in all of the components. And so this type of applying systems theory and systems engineering and concepts from evolution as well to blockchains is a very interesting avenue for me. And so that's what I've been focusing on in that perspective.
Very cool. Jordan, you want to give us a short intro, talk about what interests you?
Yeah. So I got my start in mainly tech startups. I did a lot of web and application development. And then all the way back in 2011 is when I first heard about Bitcoin. I started getting, involved in the community, in their technical discussions, and realized that I'd kind of stumbled onto something that was really very special. And so I just continued to hang with it for a few years. And eventually Mt. Gox happened, and there was a kind of an implosion in the crypto market. At which point, a lot of us, including myself, kind of stepped away from it for a little while. We weren't really sure what was happening. That was the first real serious crypto depression. But then a little project called Ethereum came out, which really shook things up. And finally, we were able to do all these things we had wanted to do with Bitcoin and really program this. And it really opened new doors and new possibilities into what I saw as could be something that really did change the world finally. And so I stayed with the community after discovering Ethereum, and I started branching out into some of the other ones, like most notably Zcash. And then several years later, I happened to stumble upon another project called Nervos, which I realize has huge potential. It's another one of these projects which has, just like the step from Bitcoin to Ethereum was a huge step forward, Nervos is another step forward. Mainly in sustainability and flexibility, key aspects of what it will take for any blockchain to truly gain global adoption.
Yeah, Jordan, I think your story is really interesting in that. I think a lot of times when people think about old school Bitcoiners, like they think, very, very anti-Ethereum and very kind of stuck, in their ways, and it has to be this way. And, if you change some things, you screw the whole thing up. But from your perspective, like Ethereum presented this kind of new kind of opportunity, and I think really seeing 2017, the bull run, all of that, it really did open a lot of doors. And I organized Ethereum meetups, and for me, the Ethereum opened up all sorts of opportunities, because it wasn't just transferring money around anymore. We could do all sorts of other things. And similarly, I saw kind of the idea with Nervos and the design, and really, jumped right in. It was just a very compelling idea, and it continues to be as we see it progress forward. So on the topic of kind of moving forward, anything to add there?
Well, one comment I got to add is yes, it's a very good point about there's a segment of every community that is extremely tribal, and they seem to believe that version 1.0 of everything is going to dominate the scene forever. Mm-hmm. That's really pretty silly. This is all technology, and one of the biggest selling points of technology is that it is flexible and that it evolves with time to fit the new situations that emerge.
Yeah.
So thinking that Bitcoin 1.0 or whatever 0.01 or whatever it was is going to be the platform that takes us forward hundreds of years without any changes is just rather silly. And so the newer technology coming out from Nervos is adding in that flexibility, which is really a fascinating thing, because it's allowing it to change over time rather than being locked into a single point going forward.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of looking forward, I know Tanner, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but what kind of novel applications related to tokens do you guys see kind of in front of us? The concept of a token is pretty simple, but when you get into actually using it and working between participants, it seems like there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah, the interesting things about Nervos in particular are kind of, you can derive them purely from the core design decisions. Jordan mentions flexibility, and I think that there's very clear reasons why Neuros is more flexible than other platforms, and as a consequence, why certain types of systems can be built on Neuros that are technically impossible to build on other systems. And that flexibility is given by the fact that by a couple decisions together. The first is the RISC-V virtual machine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that we talk about that one a lot, but it's really impressive because it allows us to not only use general purpose programming languages, which other chains support as well, but do things that are more akin to systems programming that aren't possible on other chains. The lower level virtual machine, it's a frozen standard. It's designed for hardware, which means that it's not going to change often. And blockchains, especially layer ones, are a lot more like hardware than software, right?
Sure.
And in the sense that they're very difficult to change. It's taxing. You can't push an update to a new CPU to everyone at once. You have to manufacture it and roll it out, right, and distribute it. And the other thing is that so the common example is cryptographic algorithms can be stored on chain as compiled executables rather than building in various cryptography into the opcodes, for example. The other thing is that the programming model allows a very interesting form of composition. And Jordan and I actually briefly touched on that during the discussion on the Nervos Talk forums of Jordan's new NFT standard, where basically there's this idea of chains of composition chains, I guess, where contracts can, or verification scripts can execute other verification scripts, which can then execute others. And so you have this ability to chain together more and more sophisticated rule sets, while also providing some sort of logical isolation. In normal computer systems, like an operating system, you have these execution sandboxes. And on CKB, you have, I would call them logic sandboxes, in that you can customize the boundaries of each subsequent script and what it's capable of doing. So what is a tangible example of what's possible with this? One is a project I've been working on in the development of non-fungible systems, which is taking the concept of a non-fungible token and acknowledging that cooperatives and ecosystems and their blockchain analogs, like DAOs, and assets or digital goods might be a false dichotomy, and something can be both. And that's possible on Nervos because we can actually allow the fundamental, what's typically defined in a particular specification as the fundamental set of constraints of a token. We can actually make those customizable as well instead of freezing them. So these assets become evolvable goods with policies that can be added to them over time, while still maintaining interoperability due to the existence of these logical sandboxes that are possible on the Nervos network.
I see. So you're getting much more, say, granular control to open up what is actually standardized and what can be flexible within a standard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you look at other NFTs, even very recently, a few days ago, the release of this interactive NFT design on Ethereum, where the NFT contains code itself, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can interact with them. This is still not getting outside the box. It's just enabling us to store more and more sophisticated content inside the same box. But with Nervos, we can actually design assets where the boundaries of the box are malleable, yet still, in a really weird way, the analogy begins to break down, because although they're malleable, they can still interoperate with each other.
Are they putting actual HTML on Ethereum? Is that or is it some IPFS kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a design pattern I'm starting to see emerge a lot, which is that the code is stored off chain,
Yeah.
cryptographically linked on chain, and and rendered in a micro front end. They can be embedded into websites, which is a portion of what we're doing on the Pictosis project as well. But we're adding in additional constraints so that, say, commons-based digital content that's produced can be distributed across Web 2, while still having these enforceable policies, for example, licensing and copyrights, to measure impact on and off chain, which, like I said, is something that's really only possible with the programming model on CKB.
Very cool.
Which is why we chose it. We were looking at other chains too, like Flow and Ethereum. Obviously, I'm partial to CKB for other reasons, but for this project, I was focused much more on where can we get the best functionality. So it wasn't predetermined that we chose CKB.
Got it. Jordan, anything to add on the low-level nature of CKB, or opportunities you see for tokens, looking forward?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things going forward with tokens. I mean, NFTs are probably going to be involved with the next major DeFi wave, which I don't think is over. It's just taking a break. And I think NFTs are going to play a big part of that next wave. But to comment on some of the technical parts of the NFT standard that we're putting together now, the interesting thing is that when I started originally drafting it, I had no intent of taking it really this far forward. I was actually just trying to build a standard that was compatible with Ethereum's ERC 721 and ERC 1155. And once we started getting into it a little bit deeper, and only then did we actually see that the cell model allowed us to do so much more. We could actually push it forward at levels that you couldn't do anywhere else. To make an analogy for it, for those who aren't familiar, ERC 721 was started for CryptoKitties. It's the first non-fungible token, where every single token is a little bit different than the other one, and they're not interchangeable. And then ERC 1155 took that one step further, where there was a quantity indicator indicated where you are actually having fungible instances of this non-fungible token. And this manifests itself, for example, with in-game items like a potion, for example, a magic potion in a video game, where it is a unique item, but you can have multiple of them that are identical. And so we actually took this one step further with our token standard, where you can do something like this. Like, say you create an enchantment spell that is able to enchant other items. Now you can take those potions or those swords or whatever, and you can actually apply this enchantment spell to it in a way that's completely dynamic, can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be defined at the beginning. You can define this, years after the original item was created, but you don't have to sacrifice the original item at all. You can continue to use that item. It can continue to remain scarce. And one other aspect that wasn't mentioned about this standard is that we've introduced a level of true digital scarcity that isn't seen even in things like ERC 1155. For example, with those ERC standards, the developer can come in and they can create more identical copies of it. With our standard, once you mint it, that's the end of it. You can create as many as you want in the beginning, but you can never issue more. You can only split it up and divvy them up as needed. And this is important for certain things like digital collectibles. The biggest analogy to that is something like Magic the Gathering cards or Pokemon cards, where the issuer does an initial run of these cards where they're distributed and they're sold. Then many years later, sometimes decades later, all of a sudden these cards take off in price. Well, there's nothing to stop the issuer from making another run on these cards, and counterfeits also occur. With our standard, we can digitally guarantee that they cannot do this. If they decide to make another run, it's detectable instantaneously. There's no question on which one was an original and which one was a new run.
I see. All of this is in the standard, or do you feel like there's kind of there could be an opportunity for a lot of these things to be kind of expressed more in a way that people see these opportunities? I guess is it a suggestion to go out and read the standard, or to maybe kind of wait for more materials to be produced to really understand these opportunities?
Right. Well, yeah, we're definitely going to have to put together more materials there.
Okay.
I got to say, like, a lot of the standard itself is a little bit behind where we're actually thinking.
Okay.
And we're not completely done with it either. We're still working through some of the details and seeing what else we can put into it before it's actually finished.
Yeah, this is why I asked, because some of these things that you're expressing. I mean, I've read the standard, and these are exciting to me because I hadn't connected these kind of opportunities. So yeah, really look forward
Yes, yeah.
to
These definitely
seeing those
came out
things.
after. These definitely came out after you read it. Yes.
Moving quickly. Okay, I guess on kind of on that point, I wanted to ask you guys, like, you've both done development work for a long time, and worked within different ecosystems. Can you speak to kind of the experience in kind of working in a brand new ecosystem? I mean, you guys are kind of collaborating in some ways on a fundamental standard. Can you provide like how it is working in this kind of environment, how it might compare to others?
I'm
Yeah,
still
I could speak a little
processing
bit
an
of that.
answer, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone
Well,
who's got it,
for
feel
me,
free.
it's yeah, for me, it's a mix of good and bad, actually. On the bad portion, it's a lot of work. It's absolutely a lot of work. And there's a lot of frustrations that come up along the way because you're working in an ecosystem that's moving so quickly. You see pieces of infrastructure that are coming up around you, and the documentation is still being worked on. There's still sometimes problems with it and bugs that need to be worked out, and you need to start building on it. And then you start building on this, and 3 months later, there's something else that comes out that's much better, and it's completely obsoleted the tool that you're working with. These are challenges that are inherent to any really fast-moving ecosystem. So it's both frustrating and exciting at the same time. But I'm no stranger to hard work, so I'm really glad to be a part of it. It does, while it is challenging, it definitely has its merits too. I mean, we're really on the cutting edge here, and we're doing things that have not been done before, and it's because they couldn't have been done before, not with the programming models that existed before the cell model.
Tanner?
Yeah, I have some similar experiences as Jordan, and I think that there's a couple different classes of these challenges and opportunities. From the social and ecosystem levels, it's a difficult process that requires nearly constant monitoring and then adaptation to understand how best manage and grow the ecosystem and community and sub-communities that emerge around that. One particularly challenging thing, especially with a team that's so distributed, is visibility. I think that making sure that people understand and know what's going on can be really tough, especially when the work is so rigorous and complex. It's easy, especially for, I guess maybe I only speak for myself, but I think for a lot of technical members to get so involved in that side of the work. And unfortunately, with a project such as this, it's infrastructure. Technical know-how is pretty imperative to communicating the value of these developments. So technical members so focused on the technical aspects, yet are the ones best suited to communicate to the wider community about those implications to begin with. That's a big challenge socially. There's also an opportunity there because if you are a technical person, you decide to take on that responsibility and help be a steward of the community in that way. You have there's a lot to be learned, actually. I initially was more thinking I purely want to do technical work. And then I realized that I actually learned just as much, if not more, by engaging with community members and just breaking out into side discussions and being open to people reaching out to me about these things, and come up with a lot of new ideas that I didn't have before as well. On the technical side, there's huge opportunities to wear an inventor hat here, because the programming model does actually allow, I mean, we keep saying this, but it's not hyperbole, does actually allow new forms of systems to be developed that we haven't seen before, and very interesting programming patterns. So I really enjoyed looking at the fundamental cell model and trying to derive from that various patterns that could be useful, such as the composition chaining with the logical isolation rather than execution sandboxes. Now, that's something that I haven't seen before. It's a combination of concepts that exist in other industries applied to a new context. And that's a very fun thing to do, and turns out it's pretty useful as well. So, but having said that, I remember when I was with the foundation and the tooling was nowhere near where it was now. And simply, my gosh, actually creating a token, a fungible token of the, it took me days just to work out how to do that with the tooling available. And still then it didn't work very well. The tooling has come such a long way since when I first introduced to Nervos. Yet I would continuously try to create basically SDKs. I remember early on, I created this toy demo thing called Meiosis, which was basically an object blockchain mapping. I called it kind of like an ORM, but the Nervos CKB was the data store. And that was really useful, actually. Was able to end up minting not an SUDT compatible token, because that didn't exist at the time, but a token, and perform actions on it in far fewer lines of code. And that, it's completely irrelevant now, right? It was completely irrelevant 2 weeks after I finished it. So it's very difficult to keep up with the changing. Things will stabilize, and they're beginning to stabilize more with the release of these sophisticated tools like Lumos and Capsule. But that's tough. It's constantly fighting obsolescence.
So anyone having trouble developing on CKB will always be able to empathize. You know, Tanner will be there to, you know, speak of the old war stories that, you know, things have gotten so much better and will continue to improve. On that front, I mean, how do you guys, you know, if you're approaching someone who's interested, like, how do you sell them kind of on like the pioneering story? I mean, I think like hearing from you guys kind of going through it and the opportunities that you see, I think it goes a long way. I'm just curious what you would tell someone. I mean, I think, Jordan, we've talked before about how, you know, UTXOs are kind of just this foreign thing, you know, in general. It's like, how do you convince a developer to like get involved?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple different selling points and it really depends on the type of developer you are and what you're trying to do. For example, if you're just trying to build another version of CryptoKitties or something like that, right? You're not trying to do anything new. There's little incentive to investigate the cell model because it's going to be something that's very challenging, and you're not trying to do anything different. So I can completely sympathize with that. In that case, they'd probably want to go with some other model that uses the account model, or possibly use a compatibility layer, like we're building something called Polyjuice, which helps to bridge that gap. But if you're really trying to do something new and innovative, and there are a lot of companies that are out there trying to do that right now, a lot of them are the companies that I meet because they're interested in working on CKB. And that's the ones where we really, you know, have an angle that they benefit from, because they're looking for that flexibility. They're looking for the really new ways of doing things. And at the same time, they see some very big possibilities in some of our other initiatives, like, for example, interoperability, which was just announced at the last town hall. So if you're seeking an audience, there's no question that Ethereum has the biggest dApp audience. So, like, there's no question about that. But because of our interoperability layer, you get the same audience. You can interact with the same tokens, right? You're just getting additional flexibility on top of that. And you're also getting the possibility of having a much better economic model for the future. I mean, Ethereum's seeing some serious challenges right now with their economic model and their scalability. And I mean, unfortunately, this is all stuff that was foreseeable. It's been foreseeable for quite some time, right? There's problems in the economics that are not fixed very easily. Now on Nervos, the economics are just different. They're actually shifted around in ways that we won't see those same like transaction fee problems, for example, because the incentives are different. Excuse me, and the miners are not purely compensated by transaction fees, so there's less upward pressure in that regard. So, I mean, if for as odd as this is going to sound, like we're in a right now, Nervos is in a state where it's in high flux because our infrastructure is still being built and changed all around us. But at the same time, the economics are at a very mature stage, so that those are not going to change, and that gives you stability on that front. So while the tooling might be a bit of a challenge to use, you won't be developing an application that works today, but in 2 years from now will be completely unviable due to changes on the platform.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, I guess solidifying point about, if you think about, issuance is fixed. That's not going to change. I mean, the token price and all sorts of other things could change, but as far as issuance goes, like it's fixed. And I think, even, that's a big point a lot of people make about Bitcoin. And if you look at pairing DeFi and POS, it seems that, there's some research that it may be impossible to have fixed issuance in that situation. So yeah, I think it's a great point around the things that we know for certain. Yeah, do you guys have anything to add?
Right. Yeah, and let me add one more thing to that. The issue of potentially proof of stakes competing with DeFi systems for liquidity is the issue. That's a big issue, and we're actually already seeing some of those things with Ethereum's 2.0 launch. Right now, they have approximately 10% of the liquidity needed to launch the chain, and it's not really going very well for them. And this is purely, again, just an economical thing. I mean, obviously, investors are showing with their feet that they're not willing to take that next step. It's competing with their current liquidity needs, where they can actually earn a great amount of return in DeFi.
Yeah, Tanner, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that from the perspective of a developer, I agree there are a couple different kinds defined by backgrounds and motivations, but even developers looking to build something we talk a lot here about the innovative capabilities of Nervos to build new kinds of systems. They're perfectly valid systems that already exist that could be ported over. And if it's not the project itself that's porting it over, say some sort of DeFi protocol that exists on Ethereum, someone else sees it and creates a version of it on Nervos or something like that. I think there's actually other benefits and reasons to do that. And Jordan touched on it in the end there. The economic model is better suited for custom assets to accrue value on the chain, and there's a nice positive feedback loop between the value of the custom assets and the native currency. But beyond that, there are other benefits too, which is that if we acknowledge that whereas traditional businesses build products that have consumers, the product in this environment isn't really a product, and you don't really own it. It's more that you build an ecosystem where there's value creation from all participants that ends up benefiting all participants. That should be the goal at the very least, and the infrastructure supports that. We saw an explosion of platform-based businesses in Web 2.
Yep.
Yet there's an issue there, which is that Web 2 based platforms try to create ecosystems and communities, and they do it. I mean, they do it. We see giant social media networks, for example, but they break down at some point because the infrastructure imposes constraints on the ways the ecosystems that they're trying to create can behave. And that's because the infrastructure of Web 2 is too different. There's too much of a discrepancy between how it's actually architected and how communities and ecosystems self-organize. Okay, you have these giant intermediaries that try to facilitate all these interactions, but that causes weird sorts of bottlenecks and allocations of mostly unworthy and undeserved trust in central entities. That model does not facilitate the creation of ecosystems, and that's what platforms are supposed to do, is create ecosystems. They're multi-sided, multi-sided markets and conglomerations of participants. So from that perspective, Web 3 is better than Web 2 for that. And I noted that trust is important here, or confidence. I think Nervos actually, building something on Nervos actually instills better confidence than other chains, despite the fact that it's not as old. And the reason for that is that the UTXO, first of all, the UTXO model is easier to reason about. I know that a lot of people say account model is easier to reason about, yet UTXO model has a lot more determinism. And when a transaction is submitted, you're going to know what the result is, basically a priori. Whereas in an account model, there's that sort of non-determinism there. So that's the first thing. That instills a lot more trust and confidence. The second thing is that just by the fact that the CKB is based on its virtual machine uses an instruction set architecture that's very well known, it's well defined. That's a lot better, because for any new virtual machine that's created, you have to restart. And unfortunately, when you reinvent the wheel like that, you have to restart and ensure that there are no bugs at that level. So that's another thing that would make me suspicious and less and more reserved to build on another chain. So if blockchain products are actually ecosystems, and ecosystems require trust, then it's, even from a business-minded perspective, and trying to develop dApps that and systems that basically generate income for you so you can live. Even from that perspective, I would say that Nervos is probably better to build on than a lot of other chains.
There were a couple things in there. I mean, one thing I was hearing is that, blockchains aren't really like businesses. They're these this infrastructure that people build social coordination systems on top of. But then at the end, you kind of suggested someone building a business on a blockchain, and I'm curious how, I guess, if we're moving the conversation more to like guy on the street, what would you say that what are kind of the business opportunities that are created by blockchains to someone outside of, say, a developer?
Well, that's interesting. It's similar to if we look at any. So I would say that blockchain basically provides a superior infrastructure for platforms, for the development of platforms. And platforms, when they're successful, create ecosystems. Okay, and a key sort of property of these platforms is that it's basically a thing that facilitates multiple types of participants to create value for each other. So the developers build the platform on blockchain to facilitate the growth of an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem, okay, like any system, there are boundaries. There are things that are inside the system and things that are outside the system, but those boundaries are always porous. And what's the boundary between ecosystems? It's people unified by a common goal, and maybe not their immediate goal, but maybe their personal goals, they end up aligning with the common goal of the ecosystem. And this creates a behavioral environment where people can act according to their own interests in such a way that they actually create value for others. And this is how this sort of value exchange arises. So any system where, say, a developer can build it, and then various non-developers, right? Not that the world is developers and non-developers, but then non-developers can then utilize those ecosystems, enter into the ecosystem, perform based on their personal interests, and they end up creating value for others, which in turn, because these ecosystems circulate value, ends up bringing value back to them. And so they exchange one form of value for another. Maybe that's in the form of services, right? It's very common in platforms. Maybe that's in the form of some sort of merchant or market. But in any case, once developers build the right platforms, the right technology on top of blockchain, which is an infrastructure, it's a public good, essentially, you can use it however you want. If developers use it right, in the right way, not morally right, but in an effective way towards the goal of creating ecosystems, not bring morals into it, but developers build in that way, then non-developers can then utilize the deliverables to basically generate value for themselves in whichever ways that system allows. So it's just like asking, what kind of business opportunities are opened up by the internet, right? It's well, that depends on what people decide to build on it.
Sure, or the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Jordan, anything you want to add there on blockchains and businesses?
Yeah, I think I can add in a couple examples of some more tangible things that are probably going to be coming out soon. And I can't really talk about things that have been completely unannounced yet, but there are going to be numerous ways to earn returns on existing capital through automated markets. So, basically the Uniswap equivalent. We have 2 of those coming out on the Nervos platform soon. And the really interesting thing about those is that they're initially going to support just our SUDD token, which may also be, because of our interoperability, may be things like Ethereum riding on our SUDD token, or Bitcoin, that's wrapped into one of our tokens. And so you'll be able to use them on our platform, but you'll be able to do it at a fraction of the cost that you would be on Ethereum. So you're not going to be hit with any of those fees. So right then and there, we are anticipating that there will be a shift in our direction for that. And also with that, because of the high yield that you'll be able to earn on your existing capital, we're seeing that these automated markets will likely be paying out pretty well for liquidity pools. And here's the really interesting part about this is that many people are probably aware that Uniswap unfortunately had a hack that happened not too long ago, within the last couple months, due to the reentrancy bug again, which has been plaguing Ethereum for years now. That bug does not exist on Nervos. It cannot exist just because of the way that the cell model is designed. In addition to that, because of our first-class asset model, which is part of what's built into SUDDT, the authority of the user is paramount in this system, meaning that even the smart contracts that it's interacting with cannot override it. In that sense, it means that your funds are secure. Even if our DEX was completely vulnerable and just screwed up and bug-ridden, it doesn't matter. Your funds cannot be taken from you. It's ensured by our open transaction policies that are used in the platform to ensure that you get exactly what you signed up for every time, and there is actually no risk to it. So what we're offering investors at that point is a liquidity platform with lower costs and much higher security. And because of the platform's new, also the people who get involved early will probably see very, very high yields.
So are you saying that these new systems coming out It's purely TypeScript, so the user controls the lock script. Is that how it works, implementation-wise?
Well, I'm sorry, I lost you there, Tanner. Say that again.
So if it's an so say so these systems that you just mentioned, they have they're SUDTs that they're compatible with. Therefore, the TypeScript will be SUDT based, and the lock script is changing the lock script is how the user enters into that. In that case,
Yes. It's lock script based in that case, and it's a DEX platform with using a custom lock being developed by the Make team right now.
At the end of the day, the lock is controlled by a specific key, though, right? Like the.
Yes. Well, wait. It's by a specific key. Well, I mean, it's using our open transaction pattern, which what it does is it's guaranteeing that the user is defining a specific rate at which they're willing to sell or buy their asset for. And the transaction itself cannot complete unless they are given in exchange what they bargain for, right? So this means that if the main DEX application, our server for some reason got hacked, completely compromised up and down, it doesn't matter because the on-chain script, which is using the open transaction policy, always guarantees that the user cannot have their funds lost and they must be compensated in the way that they intended to be.
I just want to say that I agree, given that the lock script itself is not only implemented properly, but also stored on chain properly. But I just want to say that's probably going to be the case from the Make team, right? But it doesn't mean that everything is automatically secure on CKB because, or other economic systems are secure on CKB because there are certain ANSI patterns that one could fall into, especially with the two primary ways a script dependency can be referenced. There are ways for a malicious developer who has control of the cell that stores the executable code that is used for a locker TypeScript. If it's not secured properly, or the developer has complete control and it's a type hash based reference, there could be the developer could prevent people from unlocking their funds, for example. So I just want to make that clear so that people listening who are new to Nervos don't take what you said, which is probably true because the Make team's developing it and they understand the system, think that, oh, no matter what I develop or use, I have complete control of my funds at all times. I just want to because I don't want that to cause any trouble.
Here, let me translate that. Is if you write really bad code, yes, you could still mess something up. Of course, that is always possible. But fortunately, with some of the core standards that are being put into place, you are going to be ensured that base layer was developed using, with some of the best developers in the industry. And I know that for a fact that we're actually, the team is also looking into formal verification for some of these things so that we can give a further level of assurance at these base layers. And as long as you build upon these layers that are out there, you can be ensured that your application is going to give the same guarantees that base layer is ensuring. So if your application is built on the higher levels, on the DApp levels, which don't rely specifically on the security, instead, you rely on the base level security levels that are by the scripts that we're providing. Then you can be relatively assured that it's going to remain safe for your users. I mean, I'm predicting that we'll see far fewer hacks on Nervos than in comparison to like Ethereum or some of the other platforms. It is really, I would be hard put to say there will never be one because I'm sure somebody will decide to go rogue and do something completely crazy and reckless at some point. But as long as you follow the guidelines that we're putting forward with these standards, you're pretty much guaranteed to be safe.
Yeah, I like Tanner's asterisk there because I think it does kind of call into, focus, the details instead of kind of the headline. And I think the separation of concerns is going to be a big thing here. Of, you know, Tanner, your concern is like if you use some funky lock script, then like maybe your money's just, you know, going to be gone. But if people are very kind of judicious about the lock scripts that they use, you know, the same way people don't send, you know, Bitcoin to the wrong address, it seems like they would, for the most part, be safe. I mean, I guess if you screw with the TypeScript, you can mess some things up too. But, you know, in terms of like losing your money, it seems like a lot of that is centered on the lock script that you use. Would you guys agree?
I think it's centered on both lock and TypeScript because both have full access to the transaction and have to succeed. The thing is that patterns emerge as basically dependencies between cells are established. And so, for example, one thing I could see happening is I write a perfectly good script. And my hypothetically, it has absolutely no bugs and no security vulnerabilities. And then when I put it on chain, the script I use from someone else to lock it, or say I want some policies added to its usage or something, put a TypeScript or lock script on it. Now, that could also be perfectly written, no security vulnerabilities, nothing. But that script that I use to lock my script uses another lock script that is also perfectly written, no vulnerabilities, but it's locked in such a way that it's referenced by its type hash, yeah. And it turns out that the developer can change it. Has complete control, has their own, say, default SecP256K1 lock script on it, and they can change that, and all of a sudden you have this domino effect where if my script, I actually did want to change something, I go to change it. Imagine I was wrong in the beginning when I said that it's perfectly secure. There was a little tweak I needed to make, but now I can't make it because 2 scripts down, a developer decided to go rogue, and I have no idea who that is. I have no visibility into that degree of separation. Yet, I end up being screwed over, and then my users do. But this is an example, though, where the kind of correct by construction principle does hold if the guidelines are followed, where using type references properly and especially from developers at first who are setting these precedents from the foundation, basically demonstrate this and write up easy to understand documentation about how to develop these things, then yeah, you can't really violate that invariant no matter how many levels of dependencies you create, if those guidelines are followed, right? But I'm just saying that it's possible. But at the same time, I mean, and I think that a lot of people in the blockchain ecosystem and industry, we know certain things intellectually about what we should and shouldn't do. However, doing things properly isn't always the only motivating factor. And so this is as much a social problem as it is a technical problem, right? And so I imagine that someone is going to do something like this because they're not going to listen to the advice or something, or they think that they're going to just deploy this script and they're not going to have adoption yet and they have time to change it. And then like their keys are compromised or something and someone changes their script, right? Any of these types of things. Preventing upgradability is one way around this, although then you have the issue of if you discover something later on, you can't upgrade it. Yeah, that's what I think. But having said all that, wow, I sound more cynical than I feel because I still trust this, the model and the scripts developed on Nervos more than any other chain for the reasons Jordan mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about low-level security on a system where things can't change. I mean, it's okay to be a little cynical. So we went pretty deep in the weeds there. So zooming out a bit, I guess for you guys, like, how do you see kind of blockchain fitting into, say, like a 5 or 10 year time frame? Like, paint a picture.
Well, I think it's going to be much more pervasive in daily life to some extent. Now, it might not be in the forefront. Like we still will probably be struggling to make payments within 5 years. Within 10 years, we might actually be using it at the stores. Hard to say though. But I think it'll probably take a lot longer than we think. However, on the backside, as infrastructure, it'll probably be much, much more prevalent. A good analogy to this is, for example, Linux, which is the most used operating system in the world. Most people don't know that they're actually using it. It's under the hood of Mac OS X and most smartphones running Android. And also your iPhone is also a derivative, a Unix derivative. All of those are running a very similar core, which it's all basically the same thing, yet nobody's interacting with it directly. So we'll probably see that with blockchain. I mean, there's no reason for it now. The costs are coming down and we're seeing the emergence of technology and standards that are really could help with security in many, many respects to the level where I don't think corporations are going to be able to ignore it anymore. It'll really come down to a case where it becomes a standard piece of infrastructure for your company, just as a basis for security, right? And if you don't have it, all of a sudden you're going to be under suspicion as to why aren't you taking this basic step? This is not exotic anymore. This is standard infrastructure.
So in terms of auditability, you're thinking, not necessarily payments.
That's right, auditability. I mean, that's a big thing, I think, for a stepping stone for companies. And as we build this web of trust, more or less, as more and more companies start to adopt blockchain technology, all of a sudden the benefits become exponential because it's pushing the security to the outer edges of it. Every time a blockchain is interacting with another blockchain, you're getting a network of trust there. And so the more that companies that are using it, the bigger that web and the less vulnerabilities that are even possible. So I expect that to happen, and I expect it to be much more prevalent in all of the various sectors as well, including payments, including things like NFTs, which I still think are emerging. But that's just one that I think is going to take much longer than we actually think it will for to truly see mass adoption.
Awesome. Tanner, where are we going?
Like, don't say anything too detailed. Yeah, I think that blockchain fades into the background. Even developers today, take web developers, for example. Many of them understand the basics of HTTP, for example, but don't really, maybe one or two more levels down the OSI layers, and they don't know what's going on. Don't know about datagrams and ordering and lossy transmissions, these sorts of things. And the similar to blockchain is that if it's successful, then it's successful in part because it becomes more and more basically hidden from the people who use it, yet also, of course, public and completely accessible to anyone who wants to. Just like you can inspect the packets that are being transmitted over the web from some remote server to your machine, but usually you don't do that. Similarly, usually you're not going to look at the blockchain directly. And the other thing, from another perspective, with this particular set of tools that blockchain provides, we now have the ability to basically design cooperatives and form cooperatives in a way that can scale a lot larger than cooperatives have been in the past, because we have a way to basically automatically perform these types of conflict resolutions and establish confidence in the other participants. That's really important, and that's what I really am looking forward to, because there's a whole slew of other models that could be developed for even people who want to generate income. I don't really want to call it a business though, because businesses involve the producer and consumer style thing. Yeah, it's very interesting. More and more things get basically partitioned from the central providers to all the users who use this infrastructure to basically own their own data, own their own credentials, and their own assets and capital. Yet they can collaborate and cooperate in new ways. So just like in the physical world, these types of organizations occur. They occur at really small scales because that type of trust isn't scalable. So now you have scalable global level trust that opens the doors for a lot of things, right? A tangible example, I just want to say, because of the huge ransomware attacks on hospitals throughout the country that are still going on. For example, it started a month or two ago, and my hometown, Vermont, for example, still the health network there, no one can access their medical records, and certain types of medical treatments have been paused. It's extremely dangerous, and it's statewide. And Vermont's not the only state; it's across the country. It's one example of what happens when you trust a system that works most of the time, but doesn't make it essentially impossible to manage this high value data. And things like that, I think people will begin to have ownership over themselves and control the access to. That also enables things like, for example, going with the electronic health records, instant transmission of health records to any provider in an authorized way. It's hundreds of millions of dollars are wasted every year in the medical system because redundant tests are performed because the institution that the patient arrived at doesn't have access to full medical records, and they take weeks to transfer and authorize, and it's still by paper. Things like EKGs, in some cases, are still transferred via floppy disks from one hospital to another, believe it or not. So yeah, that's speaking about medical records specifically, but any type of personal data can be used in that way, especially if it has high value. And you can even do things like economize on your own health history by selling an anonymized version of it to researchers. So new types of marketplaces emerge as well.
It's awesome. I'm getting strong 2017 vibes with Bitcoin headed to 20K and electronic medical records and blockchains. I mean, something's happening. Yeah, it's exciting to hear you guys both kind of hit on this. I guess like under the hood, that seemed to be the theme there. But then two different ends. I mean, Jordan, you were talking about businesses and being more auditable, and Tanner about kind of new means of social organization. I'm wondering about those two dynamics kind of approaching from two different sides, but ultimately, I mean, it has to have some sort of disruptive social force, right?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I mean, there's a lot of things that are probably going to be disrupted, but we just don't know exactly when. Like for another example is, for example, the tokenization of everything, which they keep, the fabled thing, which we don't know when it's going to happen or if it's ever going to happen at all. My suspicion on that is that we will start to see the tokenization of some large cap assets eventually. But this is a process that's going to be dragged down by regulations in various countries, and it's going to slow it down for probably a pretty long time. But the most obvious one to me is real estate, for example. People in their houses, they have a huge amount of capital that's just sitting there, right? The value is not moving. They're using it as their residence, but they could be earning a return on it. There's no reason that you couldn't tokenize the house. Use that at your low mortgage is a way to take out a second loan, which allows you to put that into various yield farming and earn a much higher return. I mean, the net effect of this is that you could be making money off of your house without having to do anything else or having any real risk to it. I mean, yield farming with your house, why not? The real reason that we haven't done it is all just because of regulation, not because people don't want it or it cannot be done.
That's a really good point. That's actually a very compelling idea. And also important about the regulation aspect, because the thing is that I hear a lot of complaints about regulation, and I also feel frustrated by it. Simultaneously, we're talking about this technology that instills trust and safety and whatnot, yet get annoyed with regulators when really they just want to keep up with all of this technical advances that we push forward. I think they're for a real future and positive future. I think we can do better in terms of working with regulators rather than working against them. It's easy to work against them, though, because it does feel like often they're telling us to slow down or telling us that's not allowed, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, that creates that friction. But we could probably do better in our collaboration and openness and educational material even. I always watch the congressional hearings where the tech CEOs show up. Often Mark Zuckerberg shows up a lot, right? And I'm always troubled by the fact that the questions asked by the people who are basically primarily in charge of regulating the tech, they often indicate that they don't really know how it works. They don't really know what questions to ask, and they don't understand the implications. And on the other side, the people answering the questions, it's very obvious that they're focused on protecting themselves and their interests and their company. And so that creates a level of dishonesty and filtration that makes it impossible for these people to even be educated when they're calling on the tech people to educate them, right? And so there's it's not a very healthy dynamic for innovation that benefits everyone.
Crypto is an interesting middle ground, though, because it's not really a private company. So I think a lot of the troubles that like Web 2 is running into is a lot of it's just getting too big, and big private companies, they have their dynamics, and crypto is similarly big, but in a lot of ways public instead of private. So those sentiments you bring up around the job of regulators, working with regulators, it really is a different paradigm, and I'm interested to see how it plays out. Is there anything else we should talk about? I feel like you guys, this has been great.
I want to add one last thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's just that the idea that blockchain-based projects are public goods, if we really think about it that way, in every other engineering discipline, engineers are held to certain levels of accountability because they have to be experts in that domain, and there's this understanding that you can't expect the people everyone who's using it to have the expertise that enables them to evaluate whether it's safe or not. If we continue to force ourselves to understand and acknowledge that blockchains are public goods, then I think it makes it a lot easier to talk to regulators and whatnot as well, because no one wants to, even if you have to adhere to a bunch of regulations that can slow you down when building a bridge, you're not going to build a bridge that willingly, no matter how inconvenient it is, that has the likelihood of collapsing and killing people, right? Similarly, we shouldn't feel too inconvenienced by having to slow down when necessary and build these safe systems that are processing more and more money every day, where people's livelihoods become to depend on it. So that's all.
Jordan, anything to add?
Yeah. Let me add something to that, which is, a current event topic, the election fiasco, the voter fraud fiasco that's been out there. I mean, this really touches on some of the things Tanner just brought up. When you're looking at these voting machines, you're talking about a black box system. It's all closed source done by private entities. We have no idea if this code was written well or not. We don't know if it's functioning. We don't know if there are backdoors involved. It's just not there. The information is not there. It's completely opaque. I mean, this is one reason why we need to be relying on open source systems like blockchain to be able to just fairly be able to audit these things. I mean, the technology that exists today in blockchain is more than capable enough of running the entire election, and scaling to that level and giving auditability where everybody is just sitting in their own home office can audit the entire blockchain and figure out immediately what the election results are. This isn't something that's pie in the sky. This is available today, right? It's just that the systems are not going to be able to be implemented because of rules and regulations, of course. And I'm not saying that this is an easy process or one that we can circumvent in any way. Of course, this is something that has to be worked out. But look at the alternative. The alternative is what we have now, which is a system of questionable devices that have cost over a period of decades, hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars. And they cannot reliably do the one thing they're supposed to do. We have videos on the internet which don't inspire any confidence because we can see the votes changing in front of our eyes. Now, these are most likely isolated malfunctions. But going back to what I just said before, we have no way of going and even looking and inspecting these systems. So we just have to trust these private entities. And as we know, private entities are always susceptible to corruption from outside sources, political entities. So this is something that has to change, in my opinion. And I hope that in the future, the public demands that they start adopting these open systems and start using blockchain for all future elections.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the potential there. And, we have the classic double spend problem where you can't spend the same money twice, and how blockchain prevents that. So that one thing that I feel is a big obstacle to pursuing this is that the double vote problem is actually is very different from the double spend problem, because the double spend problem has this one-to-one mapping between an address or the key pair and the currency. A double vote problem is essentially an off-chain identity that could have a one-to-many relationship with addresses. So you have this extra step. And so credentials and digital identity, I think we're making a lot of progress there, but we definitely need a lot more progress there before we can confidently prevent the double voting problem, for example.
Yeah, it does seem like all these systems kind of naturally gravitate together. Of course, having one system that does everything, makes it a lot more effective. I think we probably get into a whole nother realm of issues then when we have kind of like a computer system governing society. That's a bit of a different conversation. Yeah, I guess on that note, we should end it. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys, sharing your thoughts and all your insights about Nervos and blockchain in the world. Yeah, it's really interesting conversation. So I appreciate you guys' time, and yeah, for everyone watching out there, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, looking forward to doing more of these. You can follow Nervos on Twitter. It's probably the best part, or nervos.org also. Yeah, really appreciate you guys. I guess, yeah, Jordan, Tanner, where can people find you guys?
Yeah, you can find me. Probably Twitter's the best place to find me. Jordan_Mac is my Twitter handle. And I also have my website, jordanmac.info, for anybody who wants to find me on other resources. And I'm always in the Nervos Discord and Telegram channels.
Yeah, I also have website and Twitter and all those things. Yeah, so just my Twitter handle is Tanner Allard. But Tanner has no E in it. So if you want to find me that way.
I see. Yeah, it's on screen now, so they'll know how to spell it.
Yes.
All right. So with that, we'll wrap up. A big shout out to Luis for behind the scenes work, and yeah, thank you guys for joining, and yeah, talk more soon.
All right.
Good
Thanks.
talking to you.